We'll get into it all in just a moment, but first, this episode of the show is sponsored by Lawson's Finest Liquids, and joining me on the line is Sean Lawson. He's the namesake of the brewery, and we're talking about the brewery's social impact program. Sean, for those unfamiliar, what can you tell us about this initiative?
Thanks, John. Our social impact program, also known as our SIP, is an important part of what we do at Lawson's Finest to support our local communities and help people take good care of each other, protect and enjoy the natural world, and bring more fun to life. We give back through philanthropy to local nonprofits throughout Vermont in different areas of giving, and we're primarily focused on healthy communities, food and economic security, as well as protecting the natural world around us. And since opening in October of 2018 through what was called our No-Tip program and is now known as our Sunshine Fund, we've raised through guest donations over $575,000 in donations to 54 Vermont nonprofits. So it's something that Karen and I are really proud of here at Lawson's Finest, and is our way of giving back and sharing our success.
Sean will be back with us at the bottom of the show to talk a little bit more about SIP, the Social Impact Program. And you should also check out lawsonsfinest.com and their social media channels to learn more. Welcome to Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. I'm John Hall. Zack Adams of Fox Farm Brewery is here this week to talk about Rauch beer, but we're also going to talk about other things, including a sneak peek at his upcoming spontaneous release. But first, a reminder to check out beeredge.com to subscribe to the newsletter, to catch up on episodes of this podcast, as well as the Beer Edge podcast, and to check out our very cool merch page. This episode is also sponsored by Breeze. Breeze is the leading supplier of specialty malt to craft brewers. They offer the broadest product line in the industry, including a wide range of roasted malts that add flavor, color, and character to beer. Their experienced operators handcraft every batch of roasted malt to ensure the product you get is consistent. Check out brewingwithbreeze.com for beer recipes using roasted malt. We're also brought to you by NZ Hops, the cooperative of master hop growers, which is a passionate collective of farms dedicated to innovation and sustainability. Leading the charge in sustainable farm practices, some NZ hop farms have over 5 generations of knowledge that inform their composting program, used by growers to promote healthy, regenerative growth of hops year after year. This creates high-quality soil, a critical component of healthy growing conditions. At NZ Hops, they feel that sustainability is not only being a steward for the land, but also for our future. We're in it together. Join the conversation at nzhops.co.nz or join them on LinkedIn, Instagram, or on Twitter. The second major holiday weekend of the summer is now behind us, and before we all slid into a long few days off, my Instagram and the Facebook page started getting a lot of pings. It turns out that Fox Farm in Connecticut announced that it was launching a Grodziskie, one in collaboration and under the guidance of Live Oak, and this one was going to have locally smoked malt. Well, the good friends at the This Week in Rauch Beer page went nuts and were rightfully excited. So while you all were grilling hot dogs and swimming in pools, I was at my computer for like a whole 45 seconds, emailing Zack Adams, the founder and brewer of Fox Farm, asking him to come on the show and to give us the smoky lowdown. He, it seems, was also on email and agreed quickly. So now with the holiday weekend behind us, we got on Zoom and chatted about what's happening with his brewery now and what it was like during COVID and what other things are in the pipeline. So grab your flute of Polish champagne and come along with us on this conversation that started off with me asking him how things were at the brewery over Independence Day weekend.
We had a pretty lousy 4th of July weather-wise around here. It was like a high of 60 on Saturday, I think. Rain in and out all week, but the feeling and vibe was generally pretty good.
Did people stay away because of the weather, or was it just overcast be damned?
If you've ever seen our space, just a little background for folks. We're on an old dairy farm. Our brewery's housed inside of this kind of like 5,000 square foot old 1960s dairy barn. So yeah, just given the kind of bucolic setting, a lot of people are drawn to us to, enjoy a day outdoors. And so this weekend they didn't necessarily get that, but we did what we could with our indoor space.
There's really nothing quite like a farm in the rain between the puddles and the smells. And
yeah, it's a good thing the cows weren't around. And
you have this interesting thing on your website where you're talking about hospitality, and it's not really weird. It's great that you're talking about it, but it's the year of COVID 2020. You were closed to the public. You were doing curbside pickup, but the tap room was closed. And in looking through the website in advance of talking with you, I was really starting to get the sense that you spent those months and weeks that you were closed really thinking about what you wanted to do when you reopened. Is that a fair assessment?
that's a fair assessment for sure. And it was also a lot of time spent thinking about what we didn't want to do.
Yeah.
The circumstances of reopening prematurely, and what that meant for our crew and for our customers was something that was there for us, and we kind of wrestled with for at least a year. So yeah, we closed our doors, whatever that was, the third week in March or so of 2020, and I'd have to reference back when the state started kind of opening things up a little bit for on premise, but it was with some pretty tough restrictions, and the vibe that would be kind of created around here to jump through those hoops, and the demands that we put on our staff was something that we had a hard time kind of juggling, and we really just wrote it out until the week after May 16th, when the state fully reopened with no on-premise restrictions. As far as what we did want to achieve,
Yeah.
the curbside experience was very enlightening for us. Going into 2020, we never could have imagined kind of being this e-commerce business, and now to this day, at least 80% of our sales are done in advance of someone even arriving at the brewery.
That's
and that
80%.
Yeah, and up until May, you're looking at like 90 to 95%. People were showing up with their orders already placed, us being prepared to pick and pack them at a moment's notice and get them on their way in the most convenient, safe way possible. And that model and the convenience of it has really stuck. And we couldn't picture, our off-premise, retail business being done differently. And kind of opening our eyes and forcing us to be flexible and consider options that previously were off the table was something that came out of that experience. And so when we reopened for on-premise, we went to a reservation-based model. Walk-ins are still welcome at the brewery, but we're taking reservations up to 2 weeks in advance, even though we don't have an on-site food option. And it's a whole nother story there altogether, but that was one of the limiting factors for why we didn't reopen our doors sooner. But despite that, we want to give people the option to know exactly what they're walking into when they come to visit us, whether it's driving 10 minutes down the road or making a 2-hour journey or passing through on their beach vacation or something. They know if they show up at Fox Farm Brewery, if they plan accordingly, they are going to have the table that they request, whether it's indoors, outdoors, standing room, you name it. It allows us to plan in advance, and perhaps most importantly, allows us to kind of manage the vibe here. We're in a rural residential area, and being good neighbors has always been one of our chief concerns. So it allows us, for the first time in our history, to kind of draw a line in the sand where we can say, you know what, today's just a little too busy to take more people on. And we've never had that in the past.
I mean, it seems counterintuitive, though, for what I think, people think of when it comes to a brewery, or, there's often a level of spontaneity that exists of like, hey, let's go to the brewery. And but also, brewery owners or hospitality owners, wanting to have robust business and, not limit people. It sounds like that was sort of like a mental shift for you of, having a chance to have a breather in this last year, and then, saying, okay, it's okay. We're at capacity now, and we're cool with that. Is that fair?
That absolutely. And your first point about, the spontaneity element
Yeah.
of it, and how often, folks are perhaps passing through, or they had already planned their curbside pickup, but maybe they want to stop in for a beer. When they see that reservation based model, there's definitely a barrier there mentally, and that's probably been the hardest thing for us to accept as we moved forward with this plan. But the challenge is on us in our communication and the experience that we offer folks, to hopefully bring them around that, hey, those spontaneous visits are welcome. It's just on a Saturday afternoon, midsummer, between 2 and 5, we might have a hard time accommodating you. And you know what? That might not be the best time for that spontaneous visit. Maybe, try and plan around Thursday, Friday, Sunday, earlier in the day. It starts to signal to people when it's going to be a more comfortable vibe around here. And just the terminology, the vocabulary around reservation-based thing, it's that's a hard thing to get past. But I think the only thing we can do is provide an exceptional experience, and hopefully, in time, win people over, and that, hey, you're still welcome to show up by yourself. It's just be prepared to walk into something maybe a little different than what you expected.
There is I love sort of hearing it that way, and it strikes me that it's something that can cut both ways, of offering a good experience for the customer, knowing what they're going to get, giving them almost something, the spontaneity aside, giving them something to look forward to, like, oh, cool, we have reservations this weekend, and knowing that it's at a capacity that makes, your staff feel comfortable, which would probably deliver a better customer experience. But the flip side of that is it's got to be great for your staff as well, of, not being slammed and having, a busload of 100 people show up or something unexpectedly.
That's absolutely it. There was definitely some division here, as we were turning the idea over, and I was among those that wasn't necessarily in the reservation camp right away. But I think that that clarity of exactly what you're going to have going on that day, or at least a reasonable degree of certainty of what that day is going to look like, is really, really helpful. And in general, it's, we hope, and so far the early indicators are, it's as much as it is or could potentially be a deterrent, keeping folks away. And certainly the situation of like a 20-person bus showing up at a peak time, would be an example of that. We literally, might have to turn those folks away. It helps to kind of spread our business around. If people just by browsing, the reservation system, see that, things are a little busy on that Saturday afternoon, they might be more inclined to come see us on Sunday and Thursday, and kind of smooth out the shoulders of the weekend a little bit. And, in the long run, from a purely economic standpoint, it might not be so bad in that regard.
Is this something, so you said you sort of wrestled with it when you were thinking about getting reopened, and it sounds like you also were giving this a lot of forethought, because I know some people were caught by surprise where it's, oh my gosh, the state is open, let's do something. It sounds like these are conversations that you were having for weeks, if not longer, while you were closed and just doing curbside. But could this potentially be a long-term model, or are you evaluating it month by month? Or I hesitate to ask anybody, like, what does the future hold? Because at the end of 2019, everybody would have gotten it wrong. But how are you approaching this right now? Is this good for now?
Yeah, like a kind of alluded to in a different context. The flexibility is something we've had to learn over the past year and a half, and the best I can say is it's working really well right now. I think come January, February, that conversation might look a little differently, but hopefully it's something that we can stick to and implement year round. Just by matter of fact, the changes season to season aren't usually the easiest to implement, both internally and from a communication standpoint. Especially being a rural brewery like ourselves, we do see kind of this seasonal variability. But yeah, for now we're happy with it.
When you mentioned earlier, things that are, things that you wanted to do and then things that you didn't want to do. Is there anything else that sort of falls into the things that you didn't want to do post-pandemic that you might have done beforehand? Things that got, cut by the wayside?
Yeah. So the on-premise food requirement here in the state, a lot of folks had an unfavorable view of that, and it certainly affected us. And while I think it's possible there could have been a more daft touch to things, it was a relatively kind of blunt instrument for achieving a certain ends. I totally understand it. It was our regulators and decision makers had some tough things to try and wrestle with, and broad sweeping changes were kind of necessary. But for us, we're not allowed to serve food on premises. It was kind of part of one of these give and take pieces of the conversation as we were presenting this rather lofty ask of starting a brewery in this sleepy, formerly rural but mostly residential for all intents and purposes town. There was a perception maybe every weekend would be a carnival, so to speak, with so the town actually was inclined to say no food on site might make things present a little bit better to neighbors, and we were totally open with that. We were never looking for our on-premise activity and from a pure traffic standpoint to be our primary revenue center. That wasn't the goal. The goal was to welcome people into our space, give them a chance to experience it, interface with them directly, and share our story in the most personal way possible, but have that translate into beer being sold in other ways as the primary center of our volume. So I guess kind of a roundabout way of saying we didn't want to have to go back to the town and revisit elements of our special zoning permit. We didn't want to try and skirt rules, do things temporarily on a whim, and for good reason. Those breweries that do rely on a thriving tap room with pours flowing, by any means necessary, they were doing what they had to do. And if that meant microwaving some pretzels and some roller hot dogs, Lunchables, I heard, whatever it takes, some folks had to do that, and we totally understand, but we didn't want to have to put ourselves in a position to present our beer maybe in the way that we didn't necessarily intend, and then of course put our staff in any situation where they were seriously uncomfortable. So for us, just taking our time made the most sense.
When you mentioned the roller hot dogs, my mind flashed to, and I can't remember who this is, so I hope some of the listeners can, but there was a bar or brewery, I think it was a brewery, where the requirement was they had to serve food. The town said, if you want to open up, you have to serve food. And this person, whoever it was, didn't want to have the responsibility of a menu. They just wanted to make beer. And so they put, I think, hot pockets on the menu. and they had a toaster oven, but they charged something like $50 a hot pocket so that they never had to open the box or put it out because nobody would spend it. So that's sort of the opposite of where you were living. And I can't remember who it was, and hopefully it'll come to me, but that's just a weird aside.
Yeah. In our case, we would have had to, I mean, everyone understands this, knows this, but actually force someone to have that hot pocket, right? You couldn't have a beer without I guess the terminology was a meaningful meal in front of you at that time. At first, it was very lax, and depending on your health district, might have remained lax. But in the eyes of the state, you had to be consuming your alcohol with a meal, and that was a hard thing to take on for us.
As you think about, let's move sort of beyond the four walls and being reopened and the thoughts behind that. As a brewer and as somebody who, I've been lucky enough to drink your beers in the past and have really been sort of tickled by the nuance and sort of the great care that you put into your recipes. Were you able to find brewers' creativity, artistic creativity over the last year or so?
Yeah, it definitely, like everyone else, required us to look inward or focus our efforts in different directions. For us, this year marked a really big development in our spontaneous brewing program, of which we pretty much yet to share with the world. We did one beer last year that was about 40% spontaneous beers, our first blend to encompass kind of a meaningful amount of pure spontaneous beer. But internally, it was our most productive year as far as actually brewing, blending, and bottling those projects. So I don't know if we've ever shared that publicly, but sometime in the not so distant future, we'll have beer to share that's 100% spontaneous out of that program. So talk about a great category for us to kind of just look inward and really drill down on one particular thing. But to your point, so much of our brewing inspiration comes from outside experiences and travel, international travel specifically. So missing out on that has been kind of tough. We were actually in May of last year, we were trying to go to Dusseldorf on the way to visit family in Norway, and had to nix that trip, and ended up putting out our first alt beer anyway, despite the lack of.
I was going to say, I feel like
experience.
I drank an alt from you this year. Yeah.
I think it was probably around May of last year. We put our Kolsch out for the first time, and then a few months later, actually kind of doubled down. We were so happy with how that beer went and how the yeast performed that we worked an alt beer into the kind of yeast cadence when it comes to making the most out of that.
When you think about making a style like an alt and having Dusseldorf plans on your calendar that you have to scrap, do you think you would have felt better had you been on that trip in making that beer? Or I mean, I imagine you have a level of confidence in your own abilities, which you should, but is there something in your brewer mind where you like to have been to a place before you make a style, or you like to experience?
Absolutely. And I know, we had kind of chatted beforehand about, getting into smoked lagers, and, what a trip to Bamberg means for kind of painting your view of smoke beers. That was very eye-opening, and it'd be, kind of tough to imagine really dedicating oneself or, a brewery to making those beers without really experiencing them, from that place. But that said, for myself and so many, current brewers and pioneers for that matter, they have had to rely on brewing certain beers without that on the ground experience, and trying to glean what they can from books and other potential sources of information.
Yeah.
And I know personally, in like my home brewing days, I was absolutely obsessed with traditional international styles, and trying to get them right. And that didn't always come from real experience, right? A lot of the beers you might be able to pick off of shelves, especially going back 12 years ago,
Yeah.
um, weren't exactly the best example of that style. But trying to translate what you could into a good beer is one of the classic challenges that inspire American brewers.
Do you have any memory or experience of in your home brewing days? And I love that you were into the classic styles at that point, but you're right. There was a lot of people who were putting beers out on shelves where they would call it an alt or they'd call it something else. And it really kind of wasn't, at least not in the traditional sense, but it was an American interpretation of it. When you finally did start to travel and get to taste beers from the source, or, as historical breweries intended, was there a shift in your brewer's mind of, well, shit, I've been doing it all wrong, or now I finally get it? Was there anything like that?
Oh, that's a great question. I can't say I have a great example at the moment. I was very fortunate, like at a young age, um, to travel to England and spend a year there in college, and that was kind of like a first love, was English pub beer. So getting into home brewing, I had that kind of on the ground experience to draw from, but on a more practical level, going to the store and picking up London Pride, and trying to calibrate, as you're working on your home brew. That's not the best example of the beer to try and hit the mark on. The best example would be at the pub, served fresh, pulled through a hand pump. But um, I'm sure by the time I make it to Dusseldorf, I might have a good example for you. We're proud of our alt beer, but there's a lot to be said for experiencing it in the place, surrounded by the culture. It might even be from a service perspective. Same thing. I personally have not been to Czech Republic, so look forward to that experience someday as well. And um, it'd be kind of foolish and naive to say travel like that wouldn't open your eyes, if not how a beer should be brewed, but how it should be presented. So yeah.
Yeah. I want to talk about smoked beers because I know that's why so many people are listening right now. That's our largest audience right now, is the smoked beer aficionados and fans. But I want to get back to the spontaneous program because you've been open for how many years now?
4 and a few months.
Okay. I mean, there are breweries that are open for 4 months that have put out, quote unquote, spontaneous beer. And maybe they're not blends, or maybe they're not, but they're doing cool shit. They're trying to do all sorts of different things. The fact that you've taken a couple of years to do this must, at least in my mind, mean that you had a pretty specific vision for what you wanted these beers to be when they were ready.
Yeah, I
Is
think
that fair?
absolutely. Yeah, to have something in bottles now ready to share in a few months, or definitely by the end of the year, is kind of the best case scenario we could have imagined when we set out on that path. And it was one we knew was going to require a ton of patience, and for so many reasons. I mean, the feedback loop on your spontaneous beer, it's unlike anything else in brewing, right? It could be 2 years before that one batch might be viable in a blend. So one can imagine, how long that takes to iterate and improve, and we'll never stop, iterating and improving year to year. But to be kind of on the doorstep of having something ready means a lot to us. Yeah.
Was there something in your mind's palate that you were hoping for, looking for, striving for?
Domestically, there's so many breweries that are doing it well that we admire. Here in the Northeast, to have Allagash, not too far away, and to see what they've been doing since they started has been a great source of inspiration. But I think we've always kind of looked at lambic producers as being the holy grail that'll never be attainable. But if we kind of use that as our North Star, so to speak, we'll find our own voice. And that's one thing that we're so excited about is we're finding a house character, and there's some little flourishes of those intangibles you find in lambic, but there's stuff there that we've never tasted anywhere else, and it's just it's kind of giving us our own voice in the realm of spontaneous beer. And I think that's probably the most important thing is being open to developing your own character. If you just keep chasing lambic, you'll probably never get there, but hopefully you can bring something else to the world that's unique and enjoyable nonetheless.
I know we didn't talk about that we were going to talk about this in advance, and you kind of took me by surprise with this as well. So if you don't want to go too deep into it, I'm totally understand. But can you give us a little sneak peek at what you feel like this house character is showing?
It's so that pencil eraser, like rubber tire. That's what's like just so pungent in lambic, and we got like a little whiff of that going on, but we have a really pleasant phenolic character. I liken it to like straight from the can pineapple juice.
Really?
I'm not sure. Yeah. That's my own interpretation anyway. Dan.
Okay. That often has like a little bit of like a fermented character to it in my mind.
Yeah, and it's really nice, and so we
like spicy. Yeah,
and we've got some less complex blends, as well as multi-year blends that we're preparing for folks, and you'll see that kind of present in different ways, but it's a common thread that I find running through it. And I have to give a lot of credit to Dan, our brewer here. He came to us pretty much with the primary focus of leading the charge on our spontaneous program. Been with us about 18 months now. And while he's brewing lager today and wearing many hats like we all do, there's much going on there that we can thank Dan for.
So we're sometime in July right now, I guess. Yeah, beginning of July. So sometime before the end of the year, you think? Maybe, perhaps, per chance?
That's the hope. Yep. You
can't rush it. I'm not asking for a specific date because your reservation system will crash. But
no, I hardly doubt it. Just like the smoked beer category, which you could get into, but just having something that enough people perk up at, and we certainly don't want to rush the conditioning on something as new and unwieldy as spontaneous beer for us.
More with Zack in just a moment, but first, a short word from the folks who help us keep the lights on over here. Breeze is proud to control their malt, starting in the field until it arrives at your brewery. They have a long-term relationship with several hundred growers in the Bighorn Basin of Wyoming and Montana, where warm days, cool nights, and floodwater irrigation yield some of the highest quality barley in the United States. We're also brought to you by Lawson's Finest Liquids, which is guided by 5 pillars: excellence, authenticity, fun, community, and innovation. These values are represented in their product quality, work culture, guest experience, and charitable giving. The SIP, their social impact program, is the Lawson's finest way of building impactful connections and strengthening their communities while creating memorable experiences. Learn more at lawsonsfinest.com. And also check out NZ Hops. At NZ Hops, they feel that sustainability is not only being a steward for the land, but also for our planet's future. We're in it together. Join the conversation at nzhops.co.nz or join them on LinkedIn, Instagram, or on Twitter. And now back to Zack Adams of Fox Farm in Connecticut. And let's talk about some Rauch beers. All right. You've made enough subtle hints at this point. So I brought you here under the guise of wanting to talk about smoked beer. And then I started talking about hospitality and travel and spontaneous. So thanks for indulging me on all of that. But on the This Week in Rauch Beer page, starting about last week, an Instagram post from your brewery started popping up over and over again. And people were saying, oh my gosh, Fox Farms is making a Grodziskie. And people were getting very excited by it and plotting their Google Map trips to Connecticut and wanting to get some Polish champagne. And so that's why I called you up over the weekend and or emailed you over the weekend and said, hey, can you come on and talk to me about this particular beer? And so let's dive into it. You have released a Grodziskie, and it sounds delicious, and much in the same way that you were saying, you want to go to the source and learn from folks who have done it and all of that. You actually called Live Oak down in Texas to get some insight into this particular beer. So your brewery is no stranger to Rauch beers to begin with, but talk to me about the journey that led from the idea of this to the release of this.
Yeah, I think first of all, as you hinted at, we saw a massive sales opportunity to hit the untapped Grodziskie market.
Is there a badge? Is there? Yeah.
There should be, and hopefully those people are on their way, because we haven't quite seen them yet. But we were really pleasantly surprised by the initial response. As those of us that know, smoked lagers are one of the toughest sells in the business, but they really shouldn't be, and that's why a lot of us are out there beating the drum. But yeah, we wanted to jump in with both feet, and frankly, Live Oak's Grodziskie is makes up the lion's share of our exposure to the style. We've only had a few, and haven't been so fortunate to have any home brewed or commercially brewed as there's now available Polish Grodziskie. So we had to kind of draw from those couple examples we had, and really 90% of that was Live Oak. So in the most,
I feel like if you called, when you say it like that, I feel like if you called Live Oak's main switchboard, it would be, for Grodziskie advice, press 1. For our taproom, press 2. Like, you're making it seem like they are, and I think they probably, I know Dovetail's making one as well, but like, there's really not a lot of resources out there for this particular style.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, there's information, out there, and Stan has been, a great source, and you can kind of uncover articles and little, nuggets of info out there if you know where to look. But as far as, turning to a peer and, asking for advice, there's no one else like Live Oak, as far as, the experience with the style, both through their travel and years of brewing it. So in the most earnest, genuine way, we hit up Live Oak just because we had been spinning our wheels for a couple of years on brewing it, and frankly weren't comfortable without drawing some additional experience from at least conversing about it. So we really just wanted to go at it in the best possible way and not screw it up. And that's how we got in touch with Dusan and the folks at Live Oak.
Do they basically teach a master class in this?
As far as like a collaboration goes, I say there's actually more of a mentorship than a collaboration. But as far as the exchange of information, as one way as it might have been, it was the most robust conversation around brewing a beer with another brewery we've ever had. And not that we have a ton of experience; it's one of just a handful we've done here anyway. But pretty much, yeah, you could go through our emails and have a pretty good roadmap for brewing your grows.
So when you did this, you also used a local maltster.
Yeah,
and
so that's
yeah,
that's where the rubber kind of meets the road. And like we were talking about before on the other topic, finding your own voice. Live Oak has their source overseas of their oak smoked wheat, and fortunately Wireman has theirs as a more widely available option for folks that want to brew the style. But we had been kind of turning over the conversation with Spencer Thrall at Thrall Family Malt here in Windsor, Connecticut. He's first malt house, at least post prohibition, that we've been able to have here in Connecticut. He's coming at it actually from the perspective of this, I wish I could say what generation farmer. His family's been farming continuously since 1642.
it's a benefit of being in Connecticut. Yeah.
Yeah. And for those kind of aware of the area, if you've ever flown into Bradley Airport outside of Hartford, you fly over these tobacco sheds, and his family, at least for the past few generations, shade tobacco and broadleaf tobacco have been their primary revenue generators. But with tobacco kind of on the wane in a very big way, they've lost hundreds of acres.
But Rauch beer on the rise. Yeah, no, this is.
Yeah, that's what we hope, both Spencer and myself. But this is actually Spencer's first smoke. He's been thinking about it for a while, as have we. But he's gotten his malting operation off the ground over the past 3-4 years, and has his process really dialed in. And we just hope some other brewers will call him up and ask for some custom smoked barley or other grains. But in this case, he's such a savvy guy. He had the source in the lumber industry to get almost any wood varieties we wanted to use, and the know-how, Yankee farmer, to put together a smoking setup. And
so, yeah.
Yeah, that's something we just can't wait to brew this beer again already. It's, as much as brewing, people like to talk about art and science. When it comes to smoking malt, I mean, it's, at least at the scale we're talking about, it just feels like all art. I mean, you could look at the setup that he put together and instantly think of 20 variables with like a qualitative outcome and a qualitative output from those variables that you can't necessarily measure how each one changes the final product, but you could easily change whether it's the wood variety, how seasoned it is, the combustion source, how far the smoke travels, how deep the grain bed depth is. There's just so many things at play. And the best we could do was put together, or I should say, in his case, put together a smoking apparatus where he felt really comfortable about it. But then, in our case, to show up on the day of the smoke and taste the malt over the course of several hours and try and draw a line at where we hit the mark.
Yeah. So when you were putting together, I mean, it's one thing when you're working with a local maltster, but then, having a wood guy, or, a lumber source where you can actually then start to pick what you're going to burn to create the smoke for this malt. How far back did that conversation go, or how deep did that conversation go to come up with your final blend?
We honed in on we definitely wanted oak to be the primary wood variety being used, whether that was red oak or white oak. We kind of wrestled with. We ended up going with red oak for this first batch, and then just trying to create something that was a little bit our own and perhaps reflective of the Northeast. What other variety we could pair with that. And ended up settling on maple in the hopes of getting this kind of smooth, nutty quality coming through. And with Rauk beer, that doesn't always translate and can be hard to find through things, but at least keeps us engaged and feeling creative.
Do you feel like, I mean, it's one thing with hops and even with traditional malts where well-trained palates or even not so well-trained can pick out specific ingredients. Do you think people will be able to pick out maple or oak or red oak? Like, is that, are there, I guess that's the wrong way to ask it. When people are tasting this beer, are there defining flavors or characteristics that you think represent those woods, so that if somebody's drinking it, they can be hunting for it on their palate?
I hope that will come with time. I mean, oak smoke is a very distinctive flavor, as is beech.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of easy to find. I think for us, in full transparency, we've never had a maple smoked malt of any sort. So to kind of reference, what that's lending to the beer, I can only hope that comes with decades of brewing the style and being able to change up the wood varieties and learn from that experience. And as smoke is such a crazy chameleon of a flavor in beer.
Yeah.
The 10 or 12 cans I've cracked over the past week trying to wrap my head around this beer, each one presents differently depending on where your palate's at and what your surroundings are like. And I guess I have to kind of take the humble route and say, I don't know for now, but hopefully in time I'll be able to hone in on that. And that's the fun of it, is doing things for the long haul and just trying to iterate over a very, very long trajectory, as Live Hope has. I mean, and I don't think I'm speaking out of turn when I kind of share like us, each batch of new beer, and especially a smoked beer, you just can't wait to brew it again. And this is kind of a shared experience of ours. And with something as niche as smoked lagers, that might take 6 months of waiting or a year of waiting before you can brew that beer again. But the hope is you get that opportunity to iterate, and there's enough of an interest to get through that second, third, 100th batch.
You mentioned early on that it should be more popular than it is, the whole category. And obviously, like this group that we have going on Facebook, the This Week in Rauk Beer group, like it's fun and people are enthusiasts and all of that, but like these are polarizing beers, or they can be. As you're making them and you're saying they should be more popular than they are, or better received than they are, how do you have that conversation with people who, I don't know, might take offense at smoky ham water?
I think you could start by not calling it smoky ham. Hot dog water, smoked basil, anything but ham.
So I'm part of the problem. I got it. That's nothing new.
It's a lot like we've kind of got a little background experience where it took us a good year or two before we put our first smoked lager out there, but we were coming at it from day one, having had these mixed fermentation farmhouse beers that can be a little tart up front, and introducing folks. We're here in southeastern Connecticut, a lot of neighborly, friendly traffic. We might be their first exposure to quote unquote sour beer, and learning how to kind of frame that conversation and inform people, and just grinding it out, introducing people to new unexpected flavors in beer, is part of the challenge there. And we saw that program kind of grow in this very organic way. It wasn't just beer geeks driving an hour and a half, 2 hours away to pick up our mixed ferm bottles. We were winning people over, right there being perhaps their first exposure to those flavors. So I think, there's that adage, you got to have 3 sips or whatever to get over the hump of those, for lack of a better term, shocking flavors in beer. But uh, like like acidity, smoke has been around for generations and generations, and it's got that staying power for a reason. And traveling to Bamberg, there's no other way to really kind of win someone over to smoke lager than to experience it from the source there, and then sit down, at Spezial or Schneikela, and kind of just take it all in, the foods, the smells, the people. You'll have 18, 20 something year olds drinking their 500 ml glasses of
Yeah.
route beer in the streets, one after another. And I don't think that's just native to their palates. I think it's something anyone could learn to appreciate if kind of pushed on them enough.
Well, if you're not already a member, I will invite you, Zach, to join us on the This Week in Route Beer Facebook group, where you can find like-minded individuals who care deeply about route beer. And I will point out that this 3.2% Grodziskie that you've put out recently, you're calling it a delightful peak summer refresher worthy of year-round enjoyment, which just makes my heart happy to see you describe it that way. So I hope we could see this year round. I hope you get to make this again, and get to mess around with malts and different woods, and to kind of go from there. And when you do, I hope you'll come back on the show and tell us all about it.
Anytime, John. Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
So here's what happened after I stopped recording. Zach mentioned just how powerful smoked beer can be on a Monday to Monday timeline. So like when he announced that the Grodziskie was coming out and online sales were offered, the same day the brewery also released an IPA. And during that 7-day period, Zach tells me, the Rauch outsold the hops 3-1. So keep up the good work, everybody. What are you drinking to stay refreshed this summer? Drop me a line. It's John Hall, JOHNHOLL @beeredge.com, or tell me on Twitter, John_Hall. A reminder to check out beeredge.com to subscribe to the newsletter, to catch up on episodes of this podcast, as well as the Beer Edge podcast, and to check out our very cool merch page. If you want to learn more about helping us out, you can reach out to Liz Melby. She's on email at liz@beeredge.com, and she's happy to talk about advertising. This episode is sponsored by Breeze. Breeze is the leading supplier of specialty malt to craft brewers. They offer the broadest product line in the industry, including a wide range of roasted malts that add flavor, color, and character to beer. Their experienced operators handcraft every batch of roasted malt to ensure the product you get is consistent. Check out brewingwithbreeze.com for beer recipes using roasted malt. We're also brought to you by NZ Hops, the cooperative of master growers, which is a passionate collective of farms dedicated to innovation and sustainability. Leading the charge in sustainable farm practices, some NZ Hop farms have over 5 generations of knowledge that inform their composting program, used by brewers to promote healthy, regenerative growth of hops year after year. This creates high-quality soil, a critical component of healthy growing conditions. At NZ Hops, they feel that sustainability is not only being a steward for the land, but for our planet's future. We're in it together. Join the conversation at nzhops.co.nz or on LinkedIn, Instagram, or on Twitter. As promised, Sean Lawson is back with me. He's the founder of Lawson's Finest Liquids in Vermont, which is a sponsor of this episode, and I'm very thankful for that. And Sean, we're talking about the brewery's SIP, the Social Impact Program. And people often think of breweries as just beer manufacturers. So why is this program important to you, and why did you want to give back?
From the beginning, when my wife Karen and I founded Lawson's Finest back in 2008, charitable giving has always been an important part of our values, and we've really built our business as socially responsible and values-driven. And so over the years, as we've developed as a company, we've had the good fortune of success through selling our beer, and it's important to us to give back and to share that success both with the employees that work here through one of our SIP6 programs, the Great Place to Work, that includes all of our great benefits and living wages for our service employees rather than tips. Our Sunshine Fund, where we give guest donations out to nonprofits throughout Vermont. Our Super Session series, which is built to fund mini grants for community events. Our Good Brews for a Cause, where we have collaborations with other organizations and breweries to raise funds for a meaningful charitable cause. Our Green is Grand, where we're investing in solar energy and other sustainability measures like efficiency and the best equipment that we can obtain for our brewery and our facilities. And then finally, our Sip of Support, which is where we give back through donations of merchandise, sponsorships, and other programs that support nonprofit organizations throughout the Northeast here. And it's our way of sharing our success with the communities that sustain us as a business.
So it's not just the beer that makes you feel good as a consumer, but knowing that your dollars are helping out some really great causes every time you have a Lawson's beer. Thanks, Sean. Thanks for doing this. And I'll remind everybody and invite them to check out lawsonsfinest.com or the brewery's social media channels to learn more about the brewery. Don't forget, Steal This Beer every Monday and the BYO Nano podcast on the 15th of every month. Nate Schweber does the music. Jeff Quinn designed the logo. I'm John Hall. New episodes of this show release every Wednesday, and that's when I'm going to be back again to drink beer and to think beer.